We have some breaking updates from the Apex Court. Big judgment from the Supreme Court on politicians and lawmakers' freedom of speech. Top court rules that no additional restrictions than those prescribed under Article 19(2) of the Constitution. Top court adds that restrictions under Article 19(2) is exhaustive. So that's the breaking update from the Apex Court. Big judgment from the Supreme Court on politicians and lawmakers' freedom of speech. Members of Parliament, ministers and members of Legislative Assembly enjoy the freedom of speech in equal measure as other citizens under the Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. This is what the Supreme Court has said. Additional restrictions cannot be imposed on the fundamental right of free speech of such public functionaries. In fact, a constitution bench of Justices Abdul Nazir Bopanna, Gawai and so on held that restrictions on freedom of speech of public functionaries cannot, in fact, go beyond what is prescribed under Article 19(2) of the Constitution, which are exhaustive and applicable to all citizens. In fact, the case originates from a statement made by Azam Khan, then Uttar Pradesh Minister, about gang rape victims. The court was hearing a plea filed by a man whose wife and daughter were allegedly gang raped. And the plea sought lodging of a case against Khan in connection with his controversial statement that the gang rape was a political conspiracy, to which, of course, now the Supreme Court stating that no additional curbs on politicians, orders on curbs linked to Netas. Top court upholding freedom of speech. Top court ruling that no additional restrictions than those prescribed under Article 2 of the Constitution. Adds that restrictions under Article 19(2) is exhaustive. In fact, MPs, ministers and MLAs enjoy freedom of speech in equal measure as other citizens under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. This is what the Supreme Court has said. Additional restrictions cannot be imposed on the fundamental right of free speech of such public functionaries. This is what the top court has said in its judgment. We have Nilashish live with us. Nilashish, a very important judgment coming right there. Additional restriction cannot be imposed on fundamental rights of free speech of public functionaries, and that MPs, MLAs enjoy freedom of speech in equal measure as other citizens.
Well, absolutely. The question before the court was whether there should be any written code of conduct for legislatures, for lawmakers and political representatives. Whether there can be a right to free speech and expression, especially for those in public office, and whether that can be curtailed by the right to dignity. Now, what the court has clearly stated is that there can be no additional restrictions that can be prescribed beyond what are already there in Article 19(2) of the Constitution, which of course governs the right to free speech and expression. The court has said that as far as 19(2) of the Constitution is concerned, no other restriction can be imposed on the right to free speech of a citizen, and it says that restrictions under Article 19(2) are exhaustive. Now, very significantly, what the court has gone on to say is that as far as the state is concerned, it is under a duty to affirmatively protect fundamental rights of a citizen, even if the violation is by a non-state actor. So, the statement made by a minister related to the government or its affairs cannot be vicariously related to that of the government. Now, as far as a statement by a minister is concerned, if it is inconsistent with the rights of a citizen, it does not form to be a constitutional tort, but it leads to omission or commission of offence by a public official, then it is a constitutional tort. So the basic contours of this judgment being that as far as 19(2) is concerned, that is sufficient to govern the right to free speech and expression, and there can be no additional restrictions that are imposed on a lawmaker or a political representative.
Right, so Article 19(2) quite exhaustive. No additional curbs required on politicians is what the Supreme Court has said. Thank you, Nilashish, for bringing those details.